present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Do you want the whole truth?
I don't think you're ready.
Governments don't control things. A government can't control the economy without controlling people.
It's Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth.
Well, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. God knows you. He created you. God loves you, and you're worth it. Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth, and we're glad you're here. Big show. It's Friday, so we've got the Colonel at the bottom of the hour. Motley will join us on the strategy of the Republicans and the effort right now. 2016 is already here when it comes to the campaign launched by both parties. We'll ask Seaton about that. We'll talk to the Colonel about the military purge, Benghazi, and Iran's march to the nuke. And then Professor Bruce Thornton will be with us. He'll be weighing in on his latest article about the president succeeding at failing and where we are headed. He references Jeremiah Wright, as well as refers to Eric Holder's Justice Department with a reference from The Godfather. The Godfather. Don't do a Godfather accent, impression. Don't do it, Crane. But first and foremost, you know it's Friday, and that means it's Woodward and Beat the Press. Welcome, Chris Woodward.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing well. It's interesting, the story developing, obviously, out in L.A., Chad Groening bringing us the latest, and we'll get the update on that at the top of next hour if there's any news, right?
Exactly. Thank you for listening.
American Family News, One News Now, onenewsnow.com. By the way, what's your Twitter?
It is at AFNC Woodward, and my last name is WOODWARD.
Okay. You're the real Woodward.
I do have an uncle named Bob, but it's not that one.
Okay. So you're the real one. Okay. Now we move. We've got to break down the events of the press this week, and we begin with a Major Garrett, in fact, outstanding journalist, questioning Jay Carney about the lie the president told. Well, was it a lie or not? Here is Major Garrett earlier this week questioning Jay Carney about the president's statement and promise before he was elected. Roll it.
Did you remember, as many of us who covered the 2008 campaign do, the president set for himself a rhetorical standard of leadership, often telling voters that I'm going to tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. For those in the individual insurance market, did the president tell them all that they needed to hear, or principally what they wanted to hear?
Major, what I can tell you is that the president addressed this head-on yesterday, and as I talked about yesterday and in previous days, the Affordable Care Act mandates that those
represented a promise, and they feel they may work through the process as you've laid out and find that their insurance is better, but at least initially they feel, and this is represented in a lot of different places, not just anecdotally, they feel that they were, if not lied to, misled, or that a standard that the president said wasn't met.
Again, I can point you to what I've said before, and more importantly, what the president said yesterday. And the fact of the matter is, if you had insurance on the individual market prior to the passage of the Affordable Care Act, and you have that plan today, you can keep it. You're grandfathered in forever, no matter how crummy the plan is.
Business and environment reporter. Business and environment reporter for American Family News, Chris Woodward, journalist. Was the question fair, and did Carney tell the truth?
I do think the question is fair because, like it or not, Republican, Democrat, Independent, Libertarian, whatever you are, some Americans do feel like they were lied to about this health care law and their plans.
Raising my hand.
You can go on Twitter, you can go on Facebook, especially Facebook. You can go on CNN and find stories where people are exercising their freedom of speech, if you will, saying things, and they do feel like they were lied to. So the question is fair. As to Carney's, was he lying? If he wasn't lying, why does the Washington Post name if you like your health plan, you can keep it. One of the 5 myths about the Affordable Care Act.
Well said. Very good. See, I like how you, because as the commentator I am, I'm like, he's lying, he's lying. And you're the journalist.
And that story from the Washington Post is from the last, day or so at the most.
Yeah, there you go. Let's go to Jay Carney trying to explain 6. That's how many people signed up on the
Right. It's better than 5.
Right. 6. I mean, if I was just like hanging out with Jay Carney in some way, I would just look at him and just, if I was a buddy, I'd just keep on going 6. I'm sorry. Here is Jay Carney answering a question, I believe, from a CBS reporter, but not a CBS reporter, pardon me, reporter about the numbers. Roll it.
Is it fair to say somebody gets daily updates on enrollment figures in the administration?
In terms of the daily churn of this process, we set up briefings where they can...
No, I understand.
Yeah.
I'm saying somebody every day is finding out, here are today's numbers.
Again, I would refer you to CMS might be able to tell you more about that. What I can tell you is what the Secretary said. We're compiling data. You can't, you need to verify it and make it accurate. It's obviously the challenges in doing that have been exacerbated by the difficulties with the website. If
the President wanted an update right now, would somebody be able to provide him a number?
I suppose that somebody could provide a rough estimate, Chuck, but the point is you want to get accurate information when you release it publicly. And, if the purpose of this line of questioning, which I know is of fierce interest to those who never wanted affordable health insurance available to the American people to begin with, is to demonstrate that those numbers are low, we concede that they will be. We said that even before October 1st, before we had the trouble with the website, because that's how enrollment works. And if you look at Massachusetts.
There's Chuck Todd, by the way, and a big wham from Jay Carney. Okay, Chris Woodward. By the way, that was Crane Durham doing the wham. Let me ask you, as you hear the Massachusetts comparison coming in and saying, hey, we predicted it was going to be like that, and also always the jab at people who are trying to get this information. It's as if there's a sense of, you're out to get me. You're out to get me. You're not Fox News, but you're MSNBC. You're supposed to be our arm of, covering for us, the PR wing. What are you doing? So tell me your thoughts on the question and the response, and the responses in that vein of attacking the questioner.
It's certainly worth a question. We haven't gotten a ballpark figure, really, on the number of enrollees. And just to clarify, there are reports that it was like 6 people the first day and a couple hundred the next, but nonetheless, a lot lower than what some people, probably the administration included, thought. As far as bringing up Massachusetts, really, it seems to me that's kind of a deflection of the question at large, which was not about Massachusetts. It was, do you have any numbers to give us? Carney didn't have any numbers. And think about it this way. Jack Lew didn't have the numbers either when he did that Fox News interview with Chris Wallace right after open enrollment began. And you can say, well, that's right after open enrollment. Of course, he wouldn't have numbers. Why do we not have a ballpark figure from an administration official, especially the man who is the spokesman for the president, a month into open enrollment? Therefore, it is worth the question, do we have a number?
Good question, by the way. And obviously, we're still not getting the answer, unfortunately. Okay, let's go back to Chuck Todd for just a bit. And
we talk about Chuck a lot.
We do. And at times, he is remarkably fair and
sure,
candid.
I've taken up for his questions before.
Yeah, so you being the journalist you have, I have always mentioned working for NBC or MSNBC, it's a tough gig if you're trying to be a journalist. Here's the deal. The numbers from a Wall Street Journal poll came out, and you have Matt Lauer and Chuck Todd commenting on those numbers. As bad as things are for the president, they're still worse for Republicans. Roll it.
Look at the point in time we're at, where the country and its views of Washington, and suddenly you have the picture of 2 parties, a Democratic Party led by the president that apparently doesn't know how to govern, has a competency issue when it comes to this healthcare website, juxtaposed next to a Republican Party who apparently has no interest in governing.
Okay, that was actually, pardon me, that was actually the clip, and it is the correct clip they played. It was cut number 2.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of commenting on the Republicans not willing to govern. Was that a fair shot after what he said about President Obama?
You know, I watched that video a couple of times, and again, I've taken up for some of Chuck Todd's questions in the past, and he has taken up for other reporters that have gone before him in the White House briefing room that haven't had their questions answered. You know, it's statements like these that shift the focus away. And by the way, don't ever think that if I'm taking up for Republicans, it's because I am, you know, I'm out for the Republicans or I'm getting my check signed by somebody that's a Republican. You know, I interview a number of libertarians and so-called nonpartisan groups because someone needs to say something about that other group, because at the end of the day, someone has to say something about R's and D's, and Chuck Todd, in this particular example, is not doing that.
I got you. I think, and by the way, I've actually seen you take up more for the people like Chuck Todd than you have in criticizing.
Reporters are not looked at very favorably wherever they are, and certainly I get some interesting emails and phone calls.
Let's go to the analysis of this poll that I spoke to earlier. Here is Chuck Todd and Matt Lauer Power, discussing how, as bad as things are for the president, they're worse for Republicans. Roll it.
Let's talk about the president right now. Between Syria, between the shutdown, between Obamacare, how are his approval numbers stacking up?
Record low. This 42%. We have never recorded his approval rating this low at this point in time. Even his likability rating is upside down for the first time. People are starting to not even like him as much as they used to.
One side of the political coin. Let's go to the others right now and see how Republicans are faring in this latest poll. They're the ones who shut down the government.
They are. Things are so bad for them. We asked if you could have a choice of a third-party candidate or the Democratic or the Republican candidate, what would you pick? Independent candidate actually finished ahead of the Republicans. Once again in our poll, the Republican Party had a new low in their personal rating, their brand rating. They had another low in their approval rating on Capitol Hill. Seeing a question like this where they finish behind a mythical independent candidate. As bad as things are for the president, they're still worse for the Republicans.
All right. Now, was that fair of both Lauer and Todd? Were they just looking at the numbers and interpreting them in a way that would be consistent with the numbers?
Well, I mean, it's just one poll, even though Wall Street Journal is participating. You know, as far as as bad things are for Republicans comment, there are a number of center-right and far-right individuals and groups that are not pleased with the current Republicans that are in office, including those that were elected in 2010. So maybe some of those people picked up the phone or answered the email, however the poll was conducted, I'm not sure. And maybe that's why the numbers are out there. And certainly we've reported on the number of people that are running as independents against established Republicans. So, you know, things might be bad, but certainly the chuckle there that Chuck Todd threw in his commentary seems to, it's interesting, to say the least.
Okay. And incidentally, I want to credit newsbusters.org for producing these clips or having them posted up. They do some great work over there, and it allows us to publicize and do some cross-posting in the sense of playing them. Here's another clip from, I believe this is MSNBC, if I'm not mistaken, and we have, well, let's hear it. Roll it.
So is it not so much about defending Igor to their constituents, but explaining to constituents that you had a subpar junk policy that does not meet a mandated requirement of quality care in our country? Basically, you were being boondoggled to pay for something that was worthless. Yeah, the shame should really be on the private insurers that have had a lack of good regulation for years, and now how they're trying to charge everybody is just kind of ridiculous. So more regulation is coming over that.
All right, so you have Thomas Roberts from the MSNBC, Places in Politics, interviewing an analyst and their interpretation of what's going on here. It's interesting to me that this seems to be blaming the insurance companies as opposed to the people that lied about what would happen with the insurance. Chris Woodward?
It does seem to be. Oftentimes it seems like there's that that organization or that government that a person assumes everybody's just against, and therefore it's easy just to pile it on those folks because nobody likes the insurance companies, nobody likes the trial lawyers or the politicians or the reporters. So it would seem to me that they're trying to shuffle this off on the those insurance companies.
All right. Now, I want to just jump, and we're going to take a jump just because of time purposes, and I want to go to the final clip, and this is dealing with Kathleen Sebelius and the way she's being portrayed by the mainstream media for her testimony earlier this week. Roll it.
Kathleen Sebelius went before Congress yesterday, and she did something you don't see happen in Washington very often. She took the blame. She said, I'm accountable. Whether she's to blame or not, what did she accomplish for the administration?
While back on Capitol Hill, before a much more hostile audience in a congressional hearing, the woman in charge of the Affordable Care Act fell on her sword with her first full-throated apology.
Let me say directly to these Americans, you deserve better. I apologize. Hold me accountable for the debacle. Okay. I'm responsible.
Secretary Kathleen Sebelius was reluctant to pass the buck even when pressed.
I got to tell you, I watched the hearings. I read the transcripts as you did, and you actually got the transcript out to us first and foremost. Thank you, Chris Woodward. To the rest of AFR.
Yeah, all typos are my mistake.
All right, tell me, buddy. I didn't see what they portrayed there. I thought that was a really slanted report.
It was. I mean, is it newsworthy to report that she did apologize and use phrases like miserably frustrating experience, which is something she threw out initially? Certainly. But to do it in that way seems to, seems to try and say, everything's okay because she apologized. I did make some notes on this. I went back and watched this. Keep in mind that the title of the hearing was not Whose Fault Is This? The title of the hearing was PPACA, Implementation Failures, Didn't Know or Didn't Disclose. The hearing was not Whose Fault Is It? So to report it that way seems to be some sort of a spin. And I will say this, about 2.5 minutes into her opening statement, Sebelius mentioned that Verizon's server was responsible for a situation that happened last weekend, echoing statements by HHS immediately after that situation came to light and Fox News started to report it. So while she may have, quote-unquote, fallen on her sword, she was quick to point the finger at somebody.
And when she was asked about certain aspects of security and testing it, she misrepresented it. She was called on the carpet for that. She also misrepresented what would happen to her if she did try to get into the exchange. I recognize there's some back and forth there, but what she said was simply not true. And so what gets me is I'm wondering, and final question for you, Chris Woodward, if this is a conservative administration in any way and has an R by their name, are we seeing this story, basically what we're seeing is calls for resignations and potential impeachment because of the lie? I mean, as a journalist, as you're seeing the journalists respond to this, do you think their intensity as a group is high enough?
With the way the media is structured today, mainstream more or less, there would be calls for someone to resign at minimum. And certainly if it was in a Republican administration, it's pretty safe to assume that they would be raked over the coals.
I got you. All right. And I won't ask you to grade the media because it's not fair. It's too vast. But I do know this, American Family News, Chris Woodward, business and environmental reporter for American Family News, as well as just American Family News, onenewsnow.com, Chad and the crew. You'll be up to speed, top every hour. Chris, as we go to break, give me your Twitter 3 times, slow enough where even a talk show host like me can understand.
Okay, at AFNC Woodward, at AFNC Woodward, at AFNC Woodward.
Thank you, Burgundy.
Thank you. Have a good
Great
weekend.
to be with you. Chris Woodward, I absolutely look forward to this segment. In fact, there are portions of the show earlier in the week that I say, well, I'd like to save this, but it's not going to be news by then. And then, does a great job. And they do a great job over at onenewsnow.com, American Family News, top every hour. Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth. We continue with the Colonel. Colonel Gordon next on the flip side. The purge in the military, the message it's sending. Even if you don't think there's a purge, what message is it sending? Plus, Iran and Benghazi, AFR Talk.